Hi, George. I'm delighted to welcome George Kailas to the Highest You podcast. George is the CEO of a Wall Street fintech company that leverages AI to democratize access to market signals. So basically, so what does that mean, George? Tell us a little bit about what Prospero AI does.
So in simple terms, I've been both an institutional investor and a retail, everyday investor, meaning non-institutional. And, a lot of the problems that I saw, even as someone with professional experience, were pretty, pervasive. And it's very hard for people to compete against institutions with their data and informational advantage. So what I did was I took hedge fund kind of level signals and a back end that I've worked on for 14 years and went through various iterations of simplifying that and packaging it in different ways. We have a newsletter, we have an app, we're about to have an alert system. So just things that make everyday people make better decisions, smarter decisions, and have that in a form that they can understand and learn quickly. And yeah, I mean, our performance has been great. We share free picks that this year is beating the market by about 40%, last year 79%, and the 2 years before that 50% each. So we have simple stuff that works really well and also educates, and it's really exciting that we've been able to come so far and help so many people with that.
I absolutely love it. I was having tea with a friend a couple of weeks ago, and we were saying, wouldn't it be amazing to have AI scan the market and tell us what to invest in? And then I came across you, and I came across Prospero AI, and I was like, wow, it already exists. It's fantastic. Here it is. But the reason I came across you was not because of this fantastic tool. It was actually because I saw a piece that you wrote for in Arabian Business, which was about the impact of AI on humanity in organizations and what it's doing to how the ways in which it's changing organizations and how they're led, and the need for greater humanity in organizations. Now, Highest You is this podcast is all about leading with soul in the age of humanity. So I was really fascinated to invite you along to have a conversation about this. So I'd really like to start with what drives you. So you're a Wall Street investment guy who rather unusually seems to have a purpose beyond profit. So tell us about who you are and how you became conscious of that purpose.
Well, I think you kind of said the key phrase there, which is, purpose beyond profit. And I think I had a purpose first. And then, profits came or success came through that purpose. And I think where a lot of people go wrong is they just get on, they get in finance, they get to Wall Street, and their goal is to make money, or it's just, have a certain name on their resume, and that, the money or the status becomes their purpose. But, I kind of had a purpose before, and it really, I grew up in New York City, and the best way I can kind of put where my purpose came from is, I remember kind of looking at the wealth disparity and talking to my parents about, homeless people, even as a, 6 or 7 year old, and just not getting very good answers, and even thinking at the time that I wasn't getting good answers. And that kind of became, a driving force in what ultimately became my career, which was trying to find ways to create more structures of fairness. And obviously, I had that plan, and after many years, I'm kind of executing on that better and better. So it's nice to kind of have that, long view. I feel very grateful to my younger self that I kind of had that purpose, because I think a lot of people, even later in life, can't find that kind of thing. So I am very grateful to my younger self for that, because it's really, as long as I can remember, I've wanted to do this.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing to find one's purpose early in life. I share that with you, and it's a real blessing. So tell us about your experience with AI, because you're somebody who's been involved in AI for the last 14 or so years. You've obviously been an early adopter, and so I'm really curious about your point of view in terms of the things that excite you around AI from a human perspective, and then any of the concerns that you might have.
Yeah, I think that being in it for 14 years, what I like to say when we started is it was more aspirational than certainly it is now. But it's kind of seeing those trends, and even seeing the way that computers evolved. Like, I actually was again very lucky. My school was part of a laptop program in fifth grade, And we were the first year that did that. So I was kind of in the really right place at the right time in terms of getting on the edge of that, because they did that every year after that. My year was the first year. And I think just that journey with computers really helped me in seeing like where they were when I started in middle school and where they were, when I graduated college a little
That tells
after
us
that, I
something
can kind of see.
something about your age
Yeah.
versus my age. Because I think, the first time I remember a computer was it got wheeled into an office when I was working. And, I remember this thing kind of coming in and being put in the corner of my office. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? And it was really an interesting thing. But you got that in school. So, yeah.
That echoes my first experience on the laptop I got, and I brought it home, and I heard all these wonderful things about the internet, and I had a little like 14.4 dial-up connection, and I connected, and I just was typing words into the address bar. Now, of course, now that takes you to Google, but now like I was just like I was getting all these page errors, and my first response to computers and the internet was it sucks. Right? I was like, everybody tells me how amazing the internet is. I can't find anything that I'm searching for on the internet. So yeah, it's like it's kind of, early computers was kind of the problem we were talking about, where it's just like you had to have some programming ability or some, a real like drive to figure out what was going on for them to be useful, all the way to the other end where we are now, where you almost have to have no knowledge for them to be, highly useful in certain capacities. So yeah, it was just a little bit, seeing that curve and a little bit like, where I am now, and it kind of segues where it's just like AI could be a tool for good. It can be a real equalizer, especially in terms of the fact that how fast startups can catch up to incumbents. And I think we saw it with DeepSeek. That's kind of like the most extreme example. You can start very quickly and compete, even beat, someone with considerably more capital than you. So it really, it can be a force for good if used for good. But it's kind of always, that saying that, I mean, some people disagree with this, but like, people kill people, guns don't kill people. Like there's still that doesn't mean there shouldn't be laws around it. But at the end of the day, it's people that are pointing dangerous things at each other.
Yeah,
And
I love that. And the piece that you wrote in Arabian Business was really interesting to me because you talked about what people are doing within cultures around using AI. And I think you used the phrase creating an always on mentality and expecting people to be as productive as machines. So just say a little bit about your perspective on that.
yeah, you said it right there, where it's just like, and it's kind of what we're talking about in the combined form, where it's just like, well, if we have these gains, are we going to expect less from people? Because that's, I think, what you and I both agree on, right? That we need to have more availability in our lives to do kind of, soul work, finding, peace or purpose or all the things that you really need space and time to be able to find. And so, that would be my hope. And, why I care about writing about that is that we get that extra capacity and, it frees up more people, to do that kind of work. Eckhart Tolle's New World, and I always mispronounce his name, no matter how much I love him. But, he kind of talks about this opportunity that we have,
Yeah.
to free up more energy for, mindfulness, connection that could, drive us to a better direction than we've been in. And I just think that's, very, very important. And the one thing that is very, like, I think on a broader level important, we're talking about the workspace, but, society as a whole is, along those lines. And I recommended a book to you, but called Artificial Intelligence, where it talks about how we need to start looking at things closer to like Tibet's gross national happiness than the gross domestic product that we currently have. Because if you're just talking about output, we're headed for a dark future, because computers will just be better and better at humans. And if you combine the concepts that we're talking about, right, if we're still expecting just as much from humans as machines are doing more and more of the work, and we can't find some way for machines to support a better life for humans, we're not headed towards a good situation.
No, absolutely. And this is where I think we start to get into the conversation about how can humans lead differently, or how do we need to lead differently in the age of AI? Because it's my feeling that, in the past, leaders were valued for their intelligence, their IQ, the amount of knowledge that they had, their expertise, those sorts of things. I think AI completely does away with that. I mean, we've got all of that at the tips of our fingers right now. So what are we for? Well, I think in terms of leaders, what we need now is leaders who have emotional intelligence, EQ, but also I think there's something called SQ, spiritual intelligence, which is really important, which is about being able to connect to larger purpose, which is about, helping, is about leading beyond the ego, is about leading in an expanded way that comes from a place of love and growth rather than a place of fear. And, it's when you put together IQ plus, EQ plus, SQ, then you get kind of leadership of the future. So yeah, I think that I know you're somebody who has a strong spiritual orientation. So tell us about how you see leadership in this emerging era.
Well, it's a very interesting point that you're leading into because I've evolved on this even in the way that I speak. I spoke at Berkeley in the Changemaker series, I think, about a year or two ago now. And it's funny, the speech that kind of got me that speech at the Princeton International Business Conference, I was actually talking about Steve Jobs' graduation speech and
Hmm.
how that really helped me, because he talks about nonlinear paths and how he took the calligraphy class and he didn't know why. And it didn't make any sense at the time with what he was maybe trying to do. And he says he owes his design thinking to that. And I talked about how people needed to find, young people needed to find in themselves, lead with their hearts and find that creativity and not necessarily need to have it all make sense because it might make sense later. And that's not a reason not to do it. And as I was, kind of going to this, to speak at Berkeley in front of like a lot more people, and it was, very exciting. I was kind of like challenging my own assumptions around this. And what I came to was, pretty similar to what you were talking about, where I said that, you know, looking at Steve Jobs in a more complete way, right? Not only do you hear like a lot of tensions with people around him and, even not the best relationships with his family, which, should be paramount, over creativity, right? If someone doesn't have that, what kind of life do they have? And as I was thinking more, I said, well, he was a creative genius. But if you look at, what got put into the world, these phones that, kind of are in the end kind of a parallel path to what he experienced, right? They take us away, these phones take us away from our important relationships in our life and into this like new relationship into this phone. They're manufactured in a foreign country with very, questionable practices, where that's adding, even more than like on the phone level, like kind of inhumane practices in the manufacturing. And
Hmm.
I think it's two things. I think leaders should demand more of themselves beyond just like creating things and making money. But I think, we're in a place, especially now, where society has to demand it from their products and their leaders. And until we get there, right, we can call for it on a high level and we can call for things like the government to, have measure things beyond gross domestic product. But at the end of the day, I don't think we're going to see change unless it's people driven. And I don't think there's enough people demanding, good from the products they buy. And until we see that and the services they buy, and until we see that, I don't think we'll get that change.
Mm. Yeah. And because actually we're also busy buried in our phones and not looking up. We've never been more connected and yet more disconnected from each other and from any sense of really kind of meaning and purpose in the world. I think it's got us to a weird place of connected disconnection, that you're talking about there. So what's important to you? You run a business, you have people who work with you, for you. I know you have a definition of that. What's important to you as a leader?
I think there's the internal part where, yeah, I don't think authoritarian styles are going to be, kind of see that change. And you got to start with that change, with the people you work with, because if it's not with the people you work with, it's not going to really be a situation that you can propagate well. And I think the other thing is we kind of talked about people demanding that from their products, but I think what we see too much in this world is people kind of wagging their finger at other people when they're not doing it themselves. So to me, the product and the fact that, I had a longer funding journey because I wanted to have a free product. But the free product was a must for me because I had to be able to lead by example, right? I can't say we need more generosity, we need, less, profit seeking and more good behavior in the world, and then, charge people for a product. Then I'm kind of BSing everyone. So I think, and that's the hope, right? The more people experience that and say, hey, I actually see a company that's doing good and actually cares about its, customers, its users, then I think it will be easier for people to look at other companies and kind of compare them and say, well, this doesn't really, this company doesn't really care about me. And, well, I think there are a lot of, kind of dark companies. I do think I see more of this. And, I have a community of founders that are caring more about this. So I think, I think that kind of has to be the path. And then the more people we have that are kind of pushing that and standing for that and saying, no, we have to put, care in our businesses to our customers, our clients, our users, whatever you call them. I think that's the more people are going to want to see more of that in the world. So, it's always got to be circular, right? You can say, I want to see more of this in the world. I want to see other people do it. But if you're not doing something to, create that within your organization and in your relationship with the people that use your products, then you're just kind of hypocritical and ineffective as a result.
I really hear the caring, the like really actually caring about the people you work with, caring about the customers, caring about the impact that your product has in the world, and getting connected with that genuine caring about things. I wonder whether there's a generational element to this as well.
I would say, I'm kind of weird for my generation, and there's very few people in your generation. But the younger you get, I would say the more what I'm saying resonates with people. And I think it's just kind of like, the timeline we're talking about. For whatever odd reason, I was bothered by this when I was, 7 years old. So, I've had, more time with it. And I think, that's probably a more common experience for people, young people now. Just be like, what am I looking what am I looking at here? Like, we've got to do better than this. And I think, it's understandable. And, I commend, people in your generation that care about this, because it's even more extreme because you had a better world growing up.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. Although, I started out actually wanting to change the world for the better and being very conscious of social inequality. And that was my mission for a long time. And actually, the way I got to do what I do was actually a slightly different route because, the person that I was with at the time in my early 20s had a nervous breakdown. And actually, I ended up, we stopped kind of trying to change the world out there and started focusing on the world in here and made loads of change in ourselves and got interested in NLP and hypnosis, and that was how I got on a journey of personal development. So it was a kind of caring to change the world. It started with caring out there, then it came to in here, and now I'm focused back out there in the world again. So it's for me it's been a journey like that, but also connected to purpose at a very early age.
Yeah, so I think the common thread there is like, some people kind of have that innate care, and then, some people kind of, it takes a certain amount of, horror for them to see it and start caring about it. And it's so interesting because there's people that kind of see everything going on in the world and still don't care. So I wonder I wonder if that's nature or nurture or what combination of it that causes some people to kind of like recoil and need to do something, and some people to not care, and then some people to actively make it worse.
Yeah. And I just wonder how acceptable that's going to be in the future, because I think there's a changing narrative, a changing conversation about what it means to be effective in the world, to lead in the world, and what's called for in this, in these coming times. And I think actually that human element that we're talking about here, which comes down to caring and connection and all of those things, is what's going to make the difference between humans and machines, being able to make good moral judgments, being able to guide other people in a way that's effective. So I think it's going to become much more of a topic that people just can't skirt around. You just can't be a bit of a shit and be in business in the future. So I think this is how it's going to turn out. I hope this is how it's going to turn out. Let's see. So tell us a bit more about you. You're obviously young. And you've been very successful. So tell us about what do you attribute your success?
I think it really starts with that purpose and really the drive behind that purpose. And I think the most common thing for entrepreneurs, but it's useful in anything where you have big goals you have to reach, is resilience. And I think that some people look at journeys, and I think the goal of everyone, or a lot of people, is to make things look easy, right? And I think it wants to look effortless, and that's like a certain leadership style. But for me, I think that I like to be open about the fact that I've had setbacks, and what I'm doing is difficult, and I actually kind of appreciate those. But I think it's kind of finding the right balance. And I looked ahead to like the aphorism, so I was like, how much do I want to like reveal about my aphorism later? But I think it's about finding the right balance between finding your peace, finding your power, and then finding that resilience. Because I think the first two are necessary for everyone to have any success, right? Because I think you really need to be able to, if you don't have peace, you can't put good out into the world. And if you can't put good out in the world, you're not going to get it back, right? And so that it's got to start there. And then I think this is where I think some people might be too peaceful, and I had to learn the balance, and I'm constantly recalibrating. I think you need to understand your own power, know that it's there, and be able to use it in the right situations, because not everybody's going to respond to that, and then the kind of resilience that I'm talking about. But the other thing was kind of what we were talking a little about with Steve Jobs, is it's like I think, and this is where I've become more and more spiritual throughout my life. I've had so many interesting experiences that brought me from someone that like was very cynical and Machiavellian and did not believe anything if I couldn't like see, smell, touch it, all the way to this, because the universe kind of forced me to believe that I would say, especially if you're taking messages about what you should be doing, I think the right people, come connected in your path. And I think, one of the things that especially as this happens to me more, is that, I don't really believe in luck. I believe in chance, right? And the example that I always use is like, you could be sitting in an elevator with someone, or standing, nobody really sits, with someone that could be a huge opportunity, life-changing for you, right? And if you have a conversation where you weren't ready, you didn't do the right prep work, right? If it's like talking about a finance opportunity and you didn't have the proper education or knowledge or whatever, that's just going to slip by you, right? But if you're there and you're prepared or whatever, that's not luck. That's you kind of making luck out of chance. And I think that's the other thing. But that kind of comes with feeling your own power. I taught myself accounting to work at my first hedge fund when I was 17. Prospero wouldn't exist if I didn't take the pandemic or exist well if I didn't take the pandemic and go all the way from intro to Python through deep learning in 9 months, because I wanted to do something productive. And until I could start iterating on code myself, I wasn't really able to connect the people that I was talking to the metrics that I needed to build to help them. And I think that's all about like what I say is like, sometimes you have to prove you can still like rev your engine even as you get older and learn something difficult, but I think that's really about feeling your power. I didn't look at like learning to code and say like, when I think I was 36 at the time, or 35, and say this is too much for me. I don't know it. Like I haven't learned it. I was just like, I can do this. I can learn whatever I need to learn. And I think, that is a good combination of kind of being peaceful enough to hear what the universe wants from you, and then be able to be powerful enough to say, okay, this is within me. Because I think a lot of people get messages from the universe about what they should do that they tell themselves they can't do.
Hmm. Hmm. And so what practices do you have that enable you to kind of tune in to be able to hear the messages that you're getting from the universe? How do you do that?
I think there's just like two really easy things. There's meditation, mindfulness, right? You got to quiet your mind if you want to hear what's out there beyond you. Because I can still get very loud. I have a very like active mind. So it's just like if I just let that run all the time, I wouldn't hear anything.
Yeah.
But then I think the other thing's external and just really being a good listener, right? Because if you listen to people and especially you're someone that like I tell people all the time that whether it's a contract they want to renegotiate or whatever, I want to hear. I was like, the only thing that's going to piss me off is if you tell me 2 years later that you've been upset with your contract or anything like that the whole time. Like you got to tell me. Like at the time, I don't want to deal with like festering resentment. I want to deal with someone telling me they have a problem when they have a problem. But that's just kind of an extreme example. I think what we're talking about in terms of like finding these little things that are going to pull you in directions in life. The as part of a spiritual belief, I believe we're all connected, and I think people, if you can't quiet your mind enough, people that are connected with you and with the wider universe, they're going to send you the messages if you're listening. And like a really good example is, I mentioned we've had kind of a longer funding journey, like we've had some success, but like for the product we have, like I've seen many worse products that are just like seeking to squeeze more out of their users, have easier funding journeys. And one of the things that we're going to do now is look to start a fund that uses the signals and kind of is doing a lot of things the right way.
I'm in.
And yeah, there you go. And that's kind of funny because I always like thought that like I see what the other people are doing with funds, and I'm just like I don't want to be associated with that. But I realize we could do it our way, and we could have a much more charitable purpose, and also use the fund to fund the free technology that we want to build and open that up. But like yeah, that's the perfect example where I was resistant to it. And like these users that I have that some investors, that kind of thing, they kept on telling me and I should do it, and I didn't listen, right? And actually when I finally listened, I already have within a month of doing it, I already have like a really talented co-founder that's doing that's going to do it with me and actually like free me up to do my Prospero job more than I was like anticipating. And it's I was resisting it. And when I finally was like, okay, I'll listen to the people telling me to do it, it's accelerated like very quickly, quicker than I would say Prospero even has by orders of magnitude. So that's a really good example of like I didn't take my own advice for a while, and people were telling me this, and finally when I listened to what the universe was telling me, I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be an easier time, and I can actually use this money to fund Prospero myself. And not have to worry as much about what other people think and how much Prospero is gonna need to squeeze money out of its users and things like that.
Amazing story. Thank you. A great example of listening and tuning in to get the messages. So, last question. So, if you were to have an aphorism or a motto that would guide yourself and others in your leadership as we move into this kind of uncertain future, what would it be?
Yeah, so I hate to add it, but we'll say it in one bite. It's like find your purpose, your power, and your resilience.
Yeah.
I think those are just like really important to have as a leader. And I kind of gave the explanation. But one other thing that on the resilience, and it kind of touches all of these a little bit. I got some really good wisdom at one point in my life where I was kind of lamenting the fact it was actually in between my first and my second company. And my first company, basically didn't have the success that I wanted it to. And I was in it for 8 years, and I kind of had a difficult relationship with my co-founder. And I was basically, whining a little to someone and saying that it was just like, oh, I don't understand, why this didn't work. And like, I'm a good person with good intentions, and I'm really, smart and driven. And like, what am I missing here? And, the person just reframed it for me and was just like, well, you like have these big goals and ambitions and, why do you think these setbacks are, why are you taking them personally? Like, why do you think they're intent on destroying you? Like, you could look at it this way, you have, big dreams, a high purpose, like that's going to be tough to do. Like, why couldn't you look at these experiences as things that were toughening you up for the important work that you have to do instead of these like targets on your back from the universe, like meant to stop you, right? It didn't stop you. So doesn't the second one make more sense than the first one? Like the first one would only make sense if it stopped you. And I was just like, oh, actually that does make a lot of sense. And ever since then, like I was a pretty resilient person before then, but that was just more about like a dogged pursuit of my purpose where I couldn't imagine doing anything else. But I would still get a little more like hurt about setbacks and everything. But at that point, when I kind of like reframed that, you know, I even just view them more as lessons than setbacks, right? It's just like this happened to me to teach me something. What is it teaching me? Like, how is this going to get me to my ultimate goal? Because I'm definitely going to get there.
It's so perfect that, life happens for you, not to you. I think it's such a great reframe, realizing that all of these things are life's curriculum for our greater growth and expansion. So George, it's been a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective and who you are in this. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I appreciate you and your time very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was great to meet you and chat before this, and this is your questions were great, and yeah, I'm excited to see the footage, and I'm excited that we know each other now.
Me too. Thank you, George.